What's going on, guys? Welcome to Danny Wright's Dragon Stories. In a world where dragons and humans unite, kindness becomes strength, and friendship creates legend. So let's dive into the story.
The Dust Devils danced across the landing pad as Owen tightened the last bolt on the atmospheric processor. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cooling unit in his work suit. Veldris was not a kind planet. The air tasted like copper and the ground radiated heat even after sunset. But the pay was decent and the work kept his hands busy, which was all Owen needed these days. He wiped his forehead and glanced toward the volcanic mountains in the distance. The peaks glowed orange against the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, the Scalebringers made their nests in caverns that reached deep into the planet's molten core. Owen had seen them through the station's long-range cameras. Massive creatures with scales that reflected light like polished metal. Beautiful and deadly. The research team studied them from a safe distance. Nobody wanted to get close. The creatures were territorial and aggressive. 3 months ago, a survey drone flew too near a nesting site. The adult Scalebringer destroyed it with a single blast of superheated breath. Dr. Hammond showed everyone the footage as a reminder. Stay away from the mountains. Follow protocol. Stay alive. Owen gathered his tools and headed back toward the station. The main building squatted on the plateau like a metal mushroom, all curves and reinforced plating. Home for the next 8 months, assuming the colonial contract renewed. He did not mind the isolation. Other people asked too many questions that a sound stopped him halfway to the airlock. A soft chirping, almost like a bird but deeper. Owen turned slowly. The sun had dropped below the horizon and shadows pooled between the equipment containers. He activated his helmet light. Two amber eyes reflected the beam back at him. Owen froze. The creature was small, barely the size of a house cat. Dark scales covered its body, almost black in the dim light. It sat between two storage crates with something clutched in its front claws. The chirping sound came from its throat, rising and falling in distress. A Scalebringer hatchling. Out here, alone, Owen's training screamed at him to back away and alert the station. But the creature was not attacking. It just sat there, making that sad sound. The thing in its claws trembled. Against every regulation he had memorized, Owen knelt down. He kept his movements slow and unthreatening. The hatchling watched him with those intelligent eyes, but did not run. Up close, Owen could see what it held. A stone, smooth and oval-shaped, with delicate patterns carved into the surface. The stone had cracked cleanly down the middle. The two pieces hung together loosely, barely connected. The hatchling chirped again and held the broken stone toward Owen. The gesture was unmistakable. Help! Owen had never heard of Scalebringers showing this kind of behavior. They were supposed to be wild and untamable. Yet this little one looked at him with something that resembled hope. Or maybe desperation. He reached into his tool belt slowly. The hatchling's eyes followed his hand, but it did not retreat. Owen pulled out a small tube of thermal resin, the kind used for emergency hull repairs. The stuff bonded almost anything and hardened quickly under heat. The hatchling let him take the broken stone. Owen examined it carefully under his helmet light. The carvings were intricate, showing patterns that looked almost like writing. Someone had put significant effort into making this. The crack ran through the center of a particularly detailed symbol. Owen applied a thin line of resin along both edges of the break. He pressed the pieces together firmly and held them. His suit gloves had heating elements in the fingertips for working in cold environments. He activated them now, watching as the resin began to cure under the warmth. The hatchling had gone completely silent. It watched the process with absolute focus. After 2 minutes, Owen released the stone. The crack was still visible, but the pieces held firm. He tested the bond gently. Solid. The carved patterns lined up almost perfectly. Not a perfect repair, but functional. He held the stone out to the hatchling. The creature took it carefully in its claws and examined the mended crack. Then it made a new sound, a soft rumbling that came from deep in its chest. The sound reminded Owen of a cat purring, but lower and more resonant. The hatchling pressed the stone against its chest and looked up at Owen. The amber eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. Then the creature turned and scurried away toward the perimeter fence. It moved with surprising speed, disappearing into the rocks beyond the station's floodlights. Owen stood up slowly. His legs had gone stiff from kneeling. He stared at the spot where the hatchling had vanished. What had just happened? Scalebringers were not supposed to approach humans. They definitely were not supposed to ask for help. He walked back to the station in a daze. The airlock cycled him through, and he removed his helmet in the equipment bay. His hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline, probably. Or maybe just the strangeness of the encounter. He decided not to mention it in his daily report. Dr. Hammond would demand a full investigation, and the hatchling might get captured for study. The little creature had trusted Owen with something precious. That trust felt like it deserved protection, even if he could not explain why. Owen stored his tools and headed for his quarters. Through the viewport in the corridor, he could see the mountains glowing against the night sky. Somewhere out there, a small hatchling carried a mended stone. Owen wondered if it would find its way back to its nest. He wondered if it had a nest at all. Sleep came slowly that night. Owen kept thinking about those amber eyes and that sound of distress. He had fixed thousands of things in his career. Machines, equipment, systems. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he had fixed something that mattered to someone. Even if that someone had scales and claws and belonged to a species that supposedly trusted nothing. Owen did not know it yet, but that broken toy would change everything. Owen noticed the scratches first. 3 parallel lines scored into the metal plating beside his window. Fresh marks that had not been there yesterday. He ran his fingers over them during his morning inspection. Too deliberate to be random damage. Too precise that he pressed his face against the viewport and looked down. The ground below his quarters was bare red rock and scattered equipment crates. Nothing moved in the early light, but something had definitely been there. Ate tea breakfast. Owen sat alone in the corner of the common area. The research station housed 12 people total. Most of them were scientists who spent their days analyzing data or arguing about scalebringer migration patterns. Owen preferred the quiet company of machinery. He was halfway through his protein bar when Dr. Hammond's voice crackled over the intercom. All personnel were to report unusual wildlife activity immediately. Someone had spotted claw marks near the eastern perimeter. Owen kept chewing and said nothing. 3 days passed. The claw marks appeared again, this time on the equipment shed near the landing pad. Owen found them during his afternoon maintenance round. He also found something else. A smooth river stone placed carefully on top of a junction box. The stone was blue-green and polished by water. Pretty in a simple way. Owen picked it up and looked around. The cameras covered most of the compound, but there were blind spots between buildings. He pocketed the stone and continued his work. The next morning brought a cluster of white shells arranged in a circle outside his window. The morning after that, a handful of bright purple feathers stuck into the ground like tiny flags. Each gift appeared in places where Owen worked regularly. Always in camera blind spots. Always where he would find them. Owen started carrying a small bag to collect the offerings. He did not understand why the hatchling was doing this, but the items clearly mattered. They were carefully chosen and deliberately placed that on the 5th day, Owen saw the creature again. He was checking the solar array alignment when movement caught his eye. The hatchling sat on a flat rock about 20 meters away. Bigger now, noticeably larger than their first meeting. The dark scales gleamed in the sunlight. Owen set down his tools slowly. He did not approach. The hatchling watched him for a long moment, then made that same rumbling sound from before. Not distressed this time, almost content. The creature had the mended stone toy tucked against its body. They stayed like that for several minutes, just watching each other across the rocky ground. Then the hatchling turned and disappeared behind an outcropping. Owen went back to work with a strange warmth in his chest. The creature remembered him. More than that, it sought him out. Dr. Hammond caught him the next afternoon in the storage bay. The station director was a tall woman with sharp eyes and sharper questions. She wanted to know if Owen had noticed the gifts appearing around the compound. Owen admitted he had seen some stones and shells. Probably just wildlife behavior, he suggested. Veldris had plenty of native animals. Dr. Hammond did not look convinced. The behavioral patterns were too focused, too intentional. She wanted Owen to report anything else unusual. The research team needed data. Owen nodded and said he would keep watch. He did not mention the hatchling following him during equipment checks. It definitely did not mention the creature responding to his voice, because that had started happening. Owen had begun talking to the hatchling when it appeared. Simple things, mostly narration of his work. The creature would tilt its head and listen, those amber eyes tracking his movements. Once, Owen asked it to stay back while he replaced a damaged panel. The hatchling settled onto its haunches and waited until Owen finished that a supply ship arrived at the end of the second week. The crew unloaded equipment and fresh food supplies. One of them, a xenobiologist named Dr. Patel, noticed the hatchling watching from behind a storage container. The woman froze mid-step. Her cargo crate hit the ground with a bang. The hatchling bolted immediately, vanishing into the rocks. Doctor Patel turned to Owen with wide eyes. Did he know there was a scalebringer hatchling practically in the compound? Did he understand how impossible that was? Scalebringers avoided all contact with other species. They were aggressive and territorial even as juveniles. Owen explained about the broken toy and the careful approach. Dr. Patel listened with growing amazement. She pulled up research files on her tablet, showing Owen documented scalebringer behavior. Everything confirmed what she said. These creatures bonded with nothing. They imprinted on their nest for a few weeks after hatching, then became solitary and aggressive. Even their own parents could not approach them after a certain age. Yet this one followed Owen around like a lost puppy. It brought him gifts. It listened when he spoke. Doctor Patel asked if she could observe. Owen hesitated, then agreed under one condition. She stayed back and let him handle the interaction. The next morning, Owen went out with Dr. Patel, watching from the airlock window. He carried a small piece of dried fruit from the supply shipment. The hatchling appeared within minutes, drawn by Owen's presence. Owen held out the fruit. The hatchling approached cautiously. It sniffed the offering, then took it gently from Owen's fingers. The creature made that rumbling sound and settled down to eat. Dr. Patel recorded everything. Her voice came through Owen's comm unit, barely above a whisper. This was unprecedented, groundbreaking. The hatchling showed preference behaviors that should not exist in its species. Owen watched the creature eating and felt something protective rise in his chest. The hatchling had chosen him for some reason. It trusted him in a way it trusted nothing else that he decided to name it. Flint. After the mended stone, it still carried everywhere. The name felt right. That afternoon, Dr. Hammond called an emergency meeting. The station's long-range sensors had detected increased scalebringer activity in the mountains. Multiple adults were moving closer to the research compound. Dr. Patel suggested it might be related to the hatchling. Adult scalebringers were fiercely territorial. They might be searching for the young one. Owen felt his stomach tighten. Flint chose to stay near the station. Near him. But that choice might bring danger to everyone. Dr. Hammond made her decision. They would monitor the situation closely. If adult scalebringers approached the perimeter, they would initiate lockdown protocols. And they would need to relocate the hatchling before things escalated. Owen said nothing. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Flint had trusted him when it had no one else. He would not betray that trust. Not for safety. Not for protocol. Not for anything. 2 months changed everything. Flint grew from cat size to something closer to a large dog. The dark scales developed patterns that caught the light when the hatchling moved. Muscle filled out the young frame, and the claws grew sharper. But the eyes remained the same, intelligent and trusting when focused on Owen. The relationship had become the station's worst-kept secret. Everyone knew Owen spent his breaks outside with the scalebringer. Dr. Patel documented their interactions obsessively. The other researchers watched from windows with expressions mixing fascination and concern. Flint still carried the mended stone toy. The creature had grown too large for the token to fit comfortably in its claws, so it wore the stone on a woven cord around its neck. Owen had no idea where the cord came from. Flint must have made it somehow. The morning started normal enough. Owen performed his rounds while Flint followed at a respectful distance. The hatchling had learned Owen's routines and anticipated his movements. When Owen climbed a ladder to check the atmospheric sensors, Flint settled down to wait. When Owen moved to the next station, Flint followed. Dr. Hammond interrupted their routine just after noon. Her voice came through every comm unit simultaneously. All personnel to stations immediately. The long-range sensors showed multiple adult scalebringers moving down from the mountains, heading directly toward the research compound. Owen looked at Flint. The hatchling had gone completely still, head raised toward the distant peaks. A low sound rumbled from its throat. Not the content Owen had grown accustomed to. This sounded like fear. The lockdown alarm began its rhythmic wail. Owen grabbed Flint's attention with a sharp whistle. The hatchling turned immediately. Owen gestured toward the mountains, then made a shooing motion. Go! Get away from here. Find safety. Flint did not move. The amber eyes stayed locked on Owen's face. Owen tried again, more urgently this time. He pointed toward the mountains and walked several steps in that direction. Flint followed him instead of running away. The creature pressed close to Owen's leg, scales warm against his suit. The doctor. Hammond's voice crackled again. Owen needed to get inside immediately. The scalebringers were less than 2 kilometers out and closing fast. Whatever bond he had with the hatchling, it would not protect him from full-grown adults. Owen ran for the station with Flint matching his pace. They made it to the airlock just as the first warning klaxon sounded. Through the viewport, Owen could see a shape moving across the plateau. Massive, easily 20 meters from nose to tail. Scales like polished obsidian reflected the sunlight in rainbow patterns. The adult scalebringer moved with terrifying grace. Each step covered ground effortlessly. The creature's head swung back and forth, scanning the area. Searching, Flint made a sound Owen had never heard before. A sharp, piercing cry that sounded like anguish and recognition mixed together. The hatchling pressed against the airlock door, claws scraping metal. The adult's head snapped toward the sound. Those massive eyes focused on the station. On the airlock. On Flint visible through the viewport. What happened next froze everyone watching. The adult scalebringer did not approach carefully or with curiosity. It charged. The creature covered the distance in seconds, moving with focused aggression. Not toward the station itself, toward Flint. Owen understood in that horrible moment. This was not a rescue. The adult had come to kill. Dr. Patel's voice came through shaking with urgency. She had been reviewing scalebringer genetics during the lockdown. Flint's coloring was not normal. The dark scales indicated a rare mutation. And scalebringer culture, if it could be called that, rejected variations. Different colored hatchlings were driven away, or eliminated. The adult slammed into the station's outer wall. The entire structure shook. Flint cried out again and tried to push through the airlock door. Owen grabbed the hatchling and held tight. Flint was strong now, almost too strong to restrain. But Owen refused to let go. The adult's face appeared at the viewport. Molten gold eyes burned with pure hatred. The creature opened its massive jaws, and Owen saw the glow building in its throat. Superheated breath that could melt metal. Dr. Hammond was shouting something about reinforced plating and hull integrity. Owen stopped listening. He looked down at Flint trembling in his arms. The mended stone toy swung on its cord. A broken thing made whole again, just like the creature holding it. Owen made a decision that would probably cost him his job. Maybe his life. He released Flint and ran for the equipment bay. The hatchling followed, confused but trusting. Owen grabbed the keys to the maintenance vehicle and headed for the garage airlock. Dr. Patel tried to stop him over the comm. Dr. Hammond ordered him to stand down. Owen ignored them both. The garage door opened, and Owen drove out in the heavy utility vehicle. Flint jumped onto the passenger seat, claws digging into the padding. The adult scalebringer had moved back from the station wall, preparing for another charge. Owen positioned the vehicle between the adult and the station, between the massive predator and Flint. He activated every light and siren the vehicle possessed. The noise was deafening. The emergency strobes turned the plateau into a chaos of color and sound. The adult scalebringer stopped its charge. The creature's head tilted in confusion. This small metal thing dared to challenge it? This tiny human thought it could interfere? Owen leaned on the horn continuously. He flashed the high beams directly at those golden eyes. Every alarm, every warning system, every noisemaker he could activate screamed defiance into the air. Flint stood on the seat beside him. The hatchling raised its head and released a cry that matched the sirens. A declaration that sounded like this human is mine and you cannot have him. The adult took a step back, then another. The massive head swung between Owen's vehicle and the station, calculating, considering. Then the creature turned and retreated toward the rocks, not fleeing exactly, but withdrawing, temporarily defeated by noise and lights and one human's refusal to abandon a friend. Owen sat in the driver's seat with his hands shaking on the wheel. Flint pressed against his side, rumbling that deep sound of contentment. The mended stone toy rested between them. Through the vehicle's rear window, Owen could see Dr. Hammond's face in the station viewport. She looked furious and terrified and something else. Maybe impressed. Owen knew the adult would return. This was not over. But for now, Flint was safe, and that was enough. The station went into crisis mode. Dr. Hammond sealed all external airlocks and activated the perimeter defense grid. Owen brought Flint inside through the garage bay, while half the research team watched in stunned silence. Nobody had ever seen a scalebringer inside a human facility before. Flint stayed close to Owen, scales bristling with anxiety. The hatchling kept looking toward the viewports, as if expecting the adult to return any moment. The mended stone toy swung on its cord with each movement. Dr. Patel met them in the equipment bay. She had compiled data files on her tablet and practically vibrated with urgency. The xenobiologist explained what she had discovered during the attack. Scalebringer Society operated on strict genetic conformity. Any variation from normal coloring was seen as corruption. Dangerous. Wrong. Owen listened while checking Flint for injuries. The hatchling had a small cut on one shoulder, probably from pressing against the airlock mechanisms. Owen cleaned it carefully with antiseptic. Flint tolerated the treatment with only minor squirming. Dr. Patel continued her explanation. The carved stone toy was significant. Most scalebringers showed tool use capability, but creating decorative objects indicated advanced intelligence. Flint had made something beautiful for itself, then sought help when it broke. That level of problem solving was remarkable. The toy represented more than just a possession. It was Flint's attempt at creating meaning in isolation. The hatchling had been rejected by its own kind, probably since birth. Different scales meant exile or death. So Flint made something precious to hold on to. A reminder that it existed, that it mattered. When the toy broke, Flint's world broke with it. Until Owen fixed both. Dr. Hammond joined them an hour later. The station director looked exhausted. She had been coordinating with colonial authorities and analyzing sensor data. The situation was worse than expected. More adult scalebringers were gathering in the mountains. At least 7 distinct heat signatures, all focused on the area around the research station. They were hunting Flint. The different colored hatchling represented an aberration that threatened their cultural norms. They would not stop until the threat was eliminated. Dr. Hammond asked Owen directly. Could he convince Flint to leave? To run far enough away that the adults would abandon their search? Owen looked down at the hatchling pressed against his leg. Flint trusted him completely. If Owen led the creature away and left it somewhere, Flint would probably stay there. Alone, rejected by its own species and abandoned by the only being who had shown it kindness. Owen said no. He would not do that. Dr. Patel jumped in before Dr. Hammond could respond. There might be another option. The xenobiologist had been studying scalebringer communication methods. They used complex vocalizations and body language, but also appear to understand visual symbols. Cave paintings have been documented near several nesting sites. If scalebringers could comprehend symbolic communication, maybe they could learn to understand it directed at them. Maybe Owen could teach Flint a system that would allow real conversation. And if Flint could communicate complex ideas that might prove to the adults that different did not mean defective. It was a desperate plan. But desperate was all they had. Owen spent the next 3 days working with colored tiles from the station's educational supplies. Each tile represented a basic concept: blue for water, red for heat, green for food. He laid them out on the floor and showed Flint how to arrange them in sequences. The hatchling learned faster than anyone expected. Within hours, Flint understood that specific tile combinations created meaning. By the end of the first day, the creature could request food or water using the system. By the end of the second day, Flint was creating sequences that expressed emotions. Dr. Patel recorded everything. She showed Owen sequences Flint made when he was not looking. Tiles arranged to show loneliness, rejection, fear. Then other sequences showing Owen's face drawn in crude marks. Safety, trust, home. The hatchling understood far more than anyone had guessed. Flint was not just intelligent. The creature possessed emotional depth that rivaled human complexity. That on the fourth day, the sensors detected movement. 3 adult scalebringers approaching under cover of a thermal storm. The weather would interfere with the station's defensive systems. It was a coordinated assault. Dr. Hammond wanted to evacuate everyone to the underground shelter. Owen refused. Running would not solve this. The adults would keep coming until Flint was dead. The only chance was communication. Proof that Flint deserved to live. Owen suited up and gathered the color tiles. Flint watched him prepare with those knowing amber eyes. The hatchling understood this was important. Dangerous. Maybe final. Dr. Patel insisted on monitoring from inside. She would activate defensive measures if the adults attacked. But she agreed to give Owen time to try. The exterior airlock cycled open. Owen stepped onto the plateau with Flint beside him. The thermal storm raged across the landscape. Heat distorted the air and wind howled between the buildings. Through the haze, 3 massive shapes materialized. The obsidian-scaled leader from before, a second adult with scales that shimmered green-gold, and a third, slightly smaller, with copper tones mixed into its dark plating. All 3 moved with lethal purpose. Owen's hands shook as he placed color tiles on the ground. Flint stood beside him, not cowering, but not aggressive either. Just present, trusting Owen to handle this. The adult stopped 10 meters away. The obsidian leader's eyes focused on Flint with pure hatred. But the copper-scaled adult seemed different. That one looked at Flint with something else. Something that might have been recognition. Or pain. Owen gestured to the tiles. Flint moved forward and began arranging them. The sequence showed the mended stone toy. Owen helping. Kindness. Worth. Belonging. The adults watched in silence. The wind screamed around them all. Flint finished the sequence and stepped back. The mended toy visible on its cord. The copper-scaled adult took a step closer, examining the tiles, examining Flint. The other 2 adults shifted, ready to attack. But the copper-scaled one moved between them and Flint. A deliberate positioning that could not be mistaken. Protection. Defense. Choice. The obsidian leader released a sound like thunder. A challenge. The copper-scaled adult responded with its own roar. Then they fought. 2 massive scalebringers colliding in violence while Owen pulled Flint back toward the station. The thermal storm intensified around them. The third adult watched, making no move to interfere. Owen did not see how the fight ended. He got Flint inside and sealed the airlock. Through the viewport, 2 shapes separated in the storm. The obsidian leader retreating. The copper-scaled adult standing firm. Dr. Patel's voice came through shaking. One adult had just defended Flint, protected the hatchling against its own kind. Owen looked down at Flint trembling beside him. The creature still wore the mended toy. Maybe trust could change more than just one life. Maybe it could change everything. The thermal storm cleared before dawn. Owen stood at the viewport watching the copper-scaled adult settle onto a flat rock formation about 50 meters from the station. The creature had not left, had not returned to the mountains. Just waited. Flint pressed against the glass beside him. The hatchling made soft sounds that Owen had learned meant uncertainty. Want to go out. Not sure if safe. Dr. Patel appeared with fresh data. She had analyzed the fight footage frame by frame. The copper-scaled adult fought with purpose but also restraint. It drove the obsidian leader away, without causing serious injury. That spoke to specific intent. This was not random aggression. It was deliberate choice. Owen asked the question that had kept him awake all night. Why would an adult Scalebringer defend a hatchling marked for rejection? Dr. Patel pulled up genetic comparison data. She had been analyzing tissue samples from Flint collected during the injury treatment. The results showed something surprising. Scalebringer genetics were more complex than initial studies suggested. The color variations came from specific gene expressions that also correlated with enhanced cognitive function. Different color hatchlings were not defective. They were advanced. Their scales marked them as having greater intelligence potential than standard Scalebringers. The culture rejected them not because they were weak, but because they were different, superior in ways that threatened the established order. The copper-scaled adult showed similar genetic markers, subtle variations in scale coloring that indicated the same enhanced traits. That adult understood what Flint was because it had been there itself. Rejected, alone, forced to conform or die. But something had changed. Owen's intervention showed the copper-scaled adult that another option existed, that different hatchlings could be valued by intelligent beings. That rejection was not inevitable. Dr. Hammond called an emergency meeting. Colonial authorities wanted answers. 7 research personnel in the common room, plus Owen made 8. Everyone looked exhausted and scared. The station was supposed to be a safe observation point, not a battleground. Dr. Hammond laid out their options. They could request emergency evacuation and abandon the research station. They could attempt to relocate Flint far from this territory. Or they could try to establish communication with the adult Scalebringer still waiting outside. Owen voted for communication. Dr. Patel agreed immediately. The other researchers were split. Some wanted evacuation. Others saw the scientific opportunity. Historic first contact with a species previously considered non-communicative. Dr. Hammond made the final call. They would attempt control contact. Owen would lead the effort since he already had rapport with Flint. Dr. Patel would provide analysis and guidance. Everyone else would maintain station operations and monitor safety protocols. Owen suited up again 3 hours after sunrise. He gathered the colored tiles and added new ones. More complex concepts. Family, parent, regret, change, future. Flint followed him to the airlock without hesitation. The hatchling's trust remained absolute despite everything that had happened. That trust felt heavy now. Owen carried responsibility for a life that depended entirely on his decisions. The copper-scaled adult watched them approach. The creature was enormous up close, maybe 18 meters long with scales that reflected morning light in warm metallic tones. The eyes were amber like Flint's, but older, wiser, sadder. Owen set down the tiles in clear view. He gestured to Flint. The hatchling moved forward and began creating sequences. Simple ones first. Self, small, alone, broken, then more complex. Human, help, feeks, trust, belong. The adult Scalebringer leaned closer. Those massive eyes examined each tile carefully. Then the creature did something unexpected. It reached out with one enormous claw and touched a specific tile. The green one that represented growth. Changed at Owen's breath caught. The adult understood. It was trying to communicate. Dr. Patel's voice came through his helmet comm. She was watching the interaction through long-range cameras. The adult's body language showed non-aggressive curiosity. This was actual communication. Historic. Groundbreaking. Owen slowly added more tiles to the arrangement. He created a sequence showing 2 figures. One small and dark-scaled. One large and copper-scaled. Then a concept of connection. Recognition. Same. The adult studied the sequence for a long moment. Then it made a sound. Low and rumbling. Not aggressive. Almost mournful. The creature touched the tile, representing alone. Then the one showing broken. Flint moved closer to the adult. The hatchling was tiny compared to the massive creature. But Flint showed no fear. Instead, the young Scalebringer touched its mended stone toy and held it up. The adult's eyes focused on the repaired token. The copper-scaled creature leaned down, moving with careful slowness. It examined the carved patterns on the stone. The mended crack running through the center, Then the adult made another sound. Softer this time. It touched one claw gently to Flint's head. A gesture that looked like blessing or apology. Owen felt his throat tighten. He was witnessing something profound. A parent attempting to reconnect with a child that had been forced to abandon. Scalebringer culture demanded rejection of different offspring. But this adult had chosen to defy that requirement. The human's interference had given it permission to choose differently. Over the next 6 hours, Owen facilitated communication between adult and hatchling. The copper-scaled Scalebringer learned the tile system quickly. It created sequences expressing concepts of forced abandonment, cultural pressure, regret over past actions, hope for future change. Flint responded with sequences showing pain of rejection, loneliness, then finding trust with Owen, understanding that value did not require conformity. Dr. Patel recorded everything. Her voice through the calm carried suppressed excitement. This was first contact, real communication with a species that human science had written off as non-sapient. The implications were staggering. As the sun reached its peak, the adult Scalebringer made a decision. It arranged tiles in a complex sequence. Return to mountains. Speak to others. Shared a new understanding. Then it touched a tile representing future and gestured to Flint. Return sometimes. Visit. Learn. The creature was not trying to take Flint back. It was acknowledging the hatchling's choice to stay near Owen while promising to maintain connection. Family redefined on new terms. Flint made a sequence in response. Stay with human. Safe here. Trust here. But want no parent. Want connection. The adult touched its claw to Flint's head again. Then it turned and moved toward the mountains with surprising grace. Not abandoning, just giving space. Owen watched the massive creature disappear into the rocky landscape. Flint pressed against his leg, rumbling contentedly. The mended stone toy caught the sunlight. Dr. Hammond's voice came through the calm. Colonial authorities were sending a diplomatic team. This had become bigger than one research station. First contact protocols were being activated. Owen looked down at Flint, the hatchling that had trusted him with a broken toy. The creature that had changed everything by simply refusing to give up on connection. Sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest changes. Owen had just wanted to help a distressed child. Instead, he had bridged two species and challenged an entire culture. And it all started because he could not ignore something broken that needed fixing. 3 months transformed the research station into something nobody had planned. What started as a wildlife observation post became the center of unprecedented interspecies contact. Owen still performed his maintenance duties, but now he did them with a growing Scalebringer companion and regular visits from an adult who had learned to communicate through colored tiles. Flint reached near adult size. The dark scales gleamed like polished stone and muscle rippled beneath the surface. But the hatchling's personality remained unchanged. Curious, gentle with Owen, fiercely protective of the mended toy that still hung from its neck. The copper-scaled adult, whom Dr. Patel named Bronze in her reports, visited every 3 days. The creature brought other Scalebringers occasionally, always ones with subtle color variations. A hatchling with silver-tinted scales, an adolescent showing hints of deep blue, a juvenile with patterns that mixed green and purple. All of them had been rejected or exiled. All of them had survived alone. And now they gathered at the research station because word had spread through the mountains. A human valued different color hatchlings. A human showed that variation meant worth, not weakness. Owen spent his afternoons teaching communication tiles to new arrivals. Each Scalebringer learned at different speeds, but all of them learned. Their intelligence was undeniable. Dr. Patel documented everything with growing excitement. The scientific community was going to need to completely revise its understanding of this species, but Owen cared less about scientific breakthroughs than about the individuals. The silver-scaled hatchling who brought him smooth pebbles every morning. The blue-toned adolescent who learned to arrange tiles into complex poetry. The mixed-pattern juvenile who showed artistic talent by creating elaborate designs in the sand. Each one carried scars of rejection. Each one blossomed when shown acceptance. Dr. Hammond managed the diplomatic aspects. Colonial authorities sent representatives who spent weeks observing and recording. First contact protocols were established. The research station received permanent designation as a neutral ground for human Scalebringer interaction. Not everyone approved. Some scientists argued that interfering with native cultures was dangerous. Some colonial officials worried about security implications. But the contact was established. Irreversible. The only option was moving forward. Bronze became the bridge between worlds. The copper-scaled adult traveled between the mountains and the station regularly. It brought news of changes happening in Scalebringer society. The rejection of color variations was being questioned. Slowly, with resistance, but questioned nonetheless. Some nests had stopped killing different-colored hatchlings. A few adults had begun seeking out their exiled offspring. The culture was evolving because one adult had chosen to defend one hatchling. Because one human had fixed a broken toy. Owen understood the weight of that now. His simple act of kindness had triggered cascading changes. He had not intended to challenge an alien culture or establish first contact. He had just wanted to help something small and scared. Yet here they were. One afternoon, Owen found Flint arranging tiles into a complex sequence. The message took several minutes to complete. It spoke of gratitude, of trust given when trust seemed impossible, of how one mended object became the foundation for rebuilding an entire life. Then Flint created another sequence. Question: why did Owen help? Why did the human fix the toy for a creature he did not know? Owen sat down on the rocky ground. Flint settled beside him, now large enough that Owen could lean against the warm scales. He thought about how to answer, how to explain human compassion to a species that had been taught to reject variation. Finally, Owen arranged his own tile sequence. Because something was broken, because someone needed help, because ignoring suffering is the same as causing it, because all beings deserve kindness regardless of how they look. Flint rumbled deeply, the sound of understanding. Then the Scalebringer added one more tile to Owen's sequence, the one representing change. Because one person choosing differently changes everything. Dr. Patel joined them on the plateau. She carried new data files and barely contained enthusiasm. The colonial government had approved expansion of the research station. More personnel were coming. More resources. The program was growing beyond simple observation into active cultural exchange. But she also brought news that made Owen's chest tighten. The obsidian-scaled leader had been spotted near the perimeter again, the same one that had tried to kill Flint. Sensor data suggested it was watching, waiting. Bronze appeared the next morning with two other adults. Both showed subtle color variations. The copper-scaled leader arranged tiles quickly. Warning: danger. Old leaders resist change. Attack possible, Owen understood. Not all Scalebringers accepted the new reality. Some still saw different-colored individuals as threats. Bronze and its allies wanted to protect the station and the hatchlings who gathered there. The station went on alert. Dr. Hammond activated defensive systems. Everyone prepared for a potential conflict, but the attack never came. The obsidian leader watched from the rocks for 3 days. Other traditional Scalebringers joined it. They observed the station where outcasts gathered, where humans and color-variant Scalebringers worked together. Then they left. Not defeated, not converted, just choosing not to fight. Dr. Patel analyzed the behavior extensively. Her conclusion was simple. The old guard recognized they could not stop what had started. Killing Flint would not undo the changes. Other nests were already questioning rejection practices. Other adults were already seeking exiled offspring. The culture had reached a tipping point. Change was inevitable now. 6 months after Owen first mended a broken toy, the research station housed permanent facilities for interspecies cooperation. Scalebringers of various colors lived nearby. Human researchers studied and learned. Communication systems expanded beyond simple tiles into more complex exchange. Flint, now fully grown and magnificent, still stayed close to Owen. The bond had not diminished with size. If anything, it had deepened. The Scalebringer helped with heavy maintenance work and protected the station from native predators. In return, Owen provided companionship and understanding. The mended stone toy remained on its cord around Flint's neck. The token had become a symbol for all the color variant scalebringers, a reminder that broken things could be fixed. That rejection was not permanent. That trust given to the right person could change everything. Owen kept the toy on a shelf in his quarters when Flint was not wearing it. He looked at it sometimes and marveled. That small carved stone had been the key to everything. Not because it was special or valuable, but because it mattered to someone who had no one else. And Owen had chosen to care when caring seemed pointless. Bronze visited one evening and created a final message with tiles. Gratitude beyond words. You showed us that different is not defective. You proved that kindness crosses all boundaries. You gave my child hope when I could not. Owen responded simply, I just fixed a toy. Flint did the rest, but both of them knew the truth. The broken toy had been a test. Flint had offered its most precious possession to a stranger, and that stranger had treated it with care. Everything else followed from that moment. The trust, the bond, the cultural revolution, all because Owen could not ignore trembling claws holding something broken. And sometimes that is exactly how change begins, with one small act of compassion that ripples outward until everything transforms. Flint settled beside Owen as the sun set over the mountains. The mended toy caught the last light. Bronze and the other color variant scalebringers gathered nearby. Safe, accepted, valued. Owen smiled and leaned against Flint's warm scales. He had come to Veldris for solitude and simple work. Instead, he found family in the most unexpected place. And it all started with a broken toy and trembling claws. Some things were just meant to be fixed, and some bond were meant to change everything.